Thomas. All right. So we're going to be looking at Aristotle's On the Soul. And we're looking at it for a number of different reasons. Headley has expressed interest in it for his own personal reasons. I have interest in it because I think it's a good text. I think it's a good text in general to read, and it seems to inform everything else which I've been reading lately. I think that's just a common thing with these ancient texts, that you seem to either see them in everything else you're reading, or you find yourself trying to see everything else you're reading through them. So I personally think there's more clarity that we can achieve through working through this text together. Three of us have gone through the text before. Headley claims he hasn't gone through the text, but I remember him being in class with us. So
he wasn't, I'm afraid.
Let's just agree to disagree. Let's just agree to disagree on how that memory was. But anyway, so let's get into it. We'll just read paragraph by paragraph and then discuss paragraph. So I'll just start. We consider knowledge a noble and honorable thing, and one kind to be more so than another, if it is more precise or concerned with better and more wondrous things. Because it possesses both these qualifications, we will have good reason to place inquiry about the soul in the first rank. Knowledge of it seems indeed to contribute enormously toward all.
Should we maybe stop there?
Oh, okay.
Sorry to hop in on that first sentence.
Oh, there was like a sentence left.
Okay. Do you want to finish up? Sorry.
No, we can stop there. We can stop there.
Just seems like a very big claim to open up the text with.
Yes.
That we consider knowledge to be something, my translation says beautiful and honored, and one sort of knowledge more so than another, either on account of its precision or because it's about better and more wondrous things. And then he says, on both these accounts, we should with good reason rank the inquiry about the soul among the primary studies. So it seems like there's already a sort of argument in this first line, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge is something noble or honored. One kind of knowledge is better than another because of its precision or because it's about more wondrous things. And on both these accounts, because of both its precision and the wondrous object that it studies, we should rank the study of the soul amongst the best kinds of knowledge, amongst the primary studies. So the soul is somehow more wondrous than other objects, whatever that means. And we can
with more value.
And it's a subject matter that we can apparently be more precise upon than other things. So I don't know. The precision seems like a weird claim. I'd imagine mathematics would be valuable because it's a branch of knowledge that we can be precise about if we were speaking ordinarily. But the soul, at least as far as I'm, concerned, I've never seen a very clear or precise account of the soul before. It seems like I'm wondering about the precision and the wondrousness. They seem to be almost at odds with one another.
Or just completely false. One might argue. I mean, like, it's very difficult to find someone who believes in a soul these days at a university.
It would strongly depend on how Aristotle is defining soul in this particular text. Because you might come to find that a great deal of people would agree with him about the existence of the thing which he's calling soul, but because there's obviously so many different, so many applications of the term, many different things, you might you might make the mistake of saying people don't believe in something which they do believe in, they just call it something else. Like I always with these texts, I always come across the problem where I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but way back in undergrad, I remember that it was in classics or philosophy or psychology, one of the three. We came to the realization that at times that the soul is used not in the it can be used in different senses. Sometimes when they're using the term soul, they could be referring to what we refer to today as psyche. And then other times, and it seems in this case, just because of the title, they seem to be referring to the thing that animates, right? The thing that gives life. There's a difference between. Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between, at least to us. I don't know if it's the same case with them, but there's a big difference between about talking about the psyche, like this immaterial part of the human being, and then talking about the anima, or the thing that animates the body.
The animating principle.
Yeah, that's the best way to say it. And I can't tell whether when you're saying soul, they're speaking about one of them, or they're using all of they're using the term to refer to all of them as if they're this one thing that do these different things.
So often, so what you're trying to point out is like there's a looseness about how we speak about the soul today that is maybe not, that is maybe more precise in this sort of a text, right? That Aristotle has something very specific in mind when he says that the soul that we're going to study in this text is specifically the animating principle. It's not we're not in the position to say yet whether it's material or immaterial or whatever, all of these sorts of things, but what we can agree upon, at least at the outset, is that it's an animating principle of some sort. It's whatever makes the thing move.
Animating
principle.
principle.
That gives the thing life.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that gives the thing life, which I guess makes sense of why it was in our What is Life for?
Again, just to return to that question that I raised, I'm still not, so I agree that your refinement here to whatever makes a thing alive is better than just soul. But it still doesn't really solve the question that I was raising earlier about this is the more precise or the more wondrous type of knowledge. Again, biology, at least if we think about it as the principle of life, we're thinking about it maybe as a biological study, right? Whatever makes the thing alive. And that doesn't seem to be counted again amongst the ranks of precise sciences, at least in contemporary times. Like physics and mathematics seem to be the more precise sciences as we would ordinarily conceive them. So there's maybe again another difference in Aristotle's time. Why is biology considered something that could be like a precise science is something that I might want to try and figure out while we read this text. Where does the precision come from? And then why is biology wondrous, right? Like what makes us wonder about living things in this manner? It seems like there's some pause for reflection. I don't think we need to answer these questions at the outset, but he's using them to make the argument that the soul is an object of knowledge that is both very precise and I want to say metaphysically interesting, but wondrous is the better way to put it, right? It allows for a certain type of philosophical reflection that it seems like certain other studies, whichever are less precise or less wondrous, won't afford us.
All philosophy begins in wonder. Something like that. Whatever he means, there must be I'm assuming there's a continuity between those two.
Yeah, but if
something fundamental
about philosophy, if we're speaking about all philosophy, then we've pretty much left just the inquiry of the soul. So
Mhm.
we're not going to dispute that all philosophy begins in wonder. But the question is, what about the soul is so
Specifically.
wonderful? Yeah, what about
Mm.
specifically this thing? So that's a good thing there at the back of our head. All right.
Mm.
Should I continue, or does somebody else want to pick it up?
Happy to have you continue. I think that's enough for that section. Yeah.
Okay. Knowledge of it seems indeed to contribute enormously towards all uncovering of truth, but especially the truth about nature. For soul is in some sense a governing principle of living things. Okay? So I think already
Again,
there we're seeing a definition of what it means by soul.
yeah.
But
Not
the
only
claim of
soul, I would imagine. It looks like he's also making a big claim about nature, right?
sorry,
Bless you.
I know, sorry, I just
Um,
went on mute while you're talking.
No, it says, and it seems that acquaintance with the soul contributes greatly towards all truth, and especially toward the truth about nature, since the soul is in some way the governing source of living things. So, again, there seems to be a link that he's making here between not only is he talking about the soul as an animating principle, as you pointed out earlier, but that somehow nature has to do with living things. Um, that may sound at first like hearing to be a
Right.
yeah, it may
Right.
sound kind of trite or mundane or uninformative, but it's not. uh, I think maybe why I'm bringing so much modern philosophy or so much contemporary philosophy to bear on the text is because I think it provides a very useful way to distinguish Aristotle's inquiry from what we do now. Because nature, we think about something like matter or substance in like a Kantian sense of the term, where the matter is conserved. So it's this dead, inert matter rather than some sort of living um, entity. Um, the matter that say physics studies that is subject to gravitational force and the principle of conservation neither comes to be nor passes away. It just always is. And so that seems very different from life or a living organism, whatever that might mean. So maybe I'm just bringing too many things to bear at the moment. But if the soul is going to be in some way the governing source of living things and going to tell us the truth, especially about nature, then we might want to think about what nature is for Aristotle and how he's using that term as well. So just trying to raise some background questions as we go through the inquiry to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah, appreciated. Sipho, is there any way you could like disconnect from the Bluetooth? Maybe, or Hadley seems to have a fine time hearing you. I might get earphones, but the voice is a little bit muffled.
Okay, give me 1 second.
I mean that was pretty good there. It's just a little bit softer than the others.
All right, I think I think the mistake I made was putting the text on top of the microphone.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I was muffled the microphone.
That sounds like it'll do.
Sometimes I forget how these things work.
So,
I can never tell.
do we have a soul that's governing nature, or is that an image that we've got already? Soul governs nature. The soul is nature.
Not so much governing
And so
nature.
defining
I
nature, yeah.
remember. Yeah. Does it say governing nature on your text?
No. You guys are my text
In
today.
my text it's saying,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes,
On my
you
text
might
it's
text
saying
me.
it's a governing principle. 1 second. Just want to make sure I get it correctly. For soul is in some way a governing principle of living things. Okay, so if we're saying governing principle of nature, then we're already assuming that nature and living things are the same thing. So because we aren't sure, because we're not yet sure what his definition of nature is, to be safe, let's not make those things the same thing.
So yeah, we can
Okay.
maybe let's distinguish between two positions, and then we can keep both in mind. Either nature is a living thing, and then soul and nature are identical. That would be the first position. Or living things are a part of nature, and so soul can inform us about a part of nature rather than all nature as such.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction to make.
Yeah, more.
Okay. Where was I? Okay. We seek to discern and to understand both its nature and its distinct being. And then also whatever comes along with it. And of these, some seem to be the affections belonging to the soul itself, others rather to come about in living things because of the soul. Okay.
Can you repeat? Sorry, just one more time.
No problem. We seek to discern and to understand both its nature. Right, this is the soul we're talking about. Both its nature and its distinct being. And then also whatever comes along with it. And of these, some seem to be affections belonging to the soul itself, others rather to come about in living things because of the soul.
Okay. I'm not really sure I understand that passage, but if everybody else is fine, we can.
No, Hadley, do you mind reading it again? Just the audio is a bit clearer. It might be a bit.
Okay. My translation's slightly different than Sipho's, but I think it should be roughly fine.
Good to get difference, yeah.
Yeah, so mine is, and we are seeking to bring to sight and to understanding the nature and thinghood of the soul, and then whatever follows about it, among which seem to be some attributes of the soul by itself, and others that belong to the living things on account of the soul.
Notice that last distinction there. Sorry, Hadley. The
Among
last two, like,
which seem to be some attributes of the soul by itself, so some qualities that or accidents that belong to the soul in its own right, and others that belong to the living things on account of the soul. So what the soul contributes to living things in virtue of animating them, or something like that. So the soul has certain qualities by itself, and I imagine these qualities would be in living things on account of that soul.
would that imply that maybe this should give us some resources? I mean, this distinction would give us some resources to at least think about the first distinction, whether the soul is part of nature or, in some sense, is nature. Was that how did we understand that distinction? I forget now.
Not,
I said,
not the soul, living things. If living things are part of nature,
Living
not
thing.
necessarily the soul.
yeah, so either nature is a living thing or living things are part of nature. I don't think we want to conclude on either side yet, but those are the two distinct ways in which we can understand them. And now we're getting two distinct ways in which we can understand the soul, it looks like. The
Yeah.
qualities of the soul by itself, what belongs to the soul as a soul, or
Yeah.
what the soul has in virtue of being a soul, and then what belongs to living things on account of the soul. So what the soul contributes to living beings.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, it might turn out, but again, we're in early days in the text, it might turn out that what the soul contributes to living beings could be different for different living beings, depending on what their features are. I imagine that like irrational animals like human beings must be distinguished in some way from non-rational animals like I don't know, fish, I guess. I have no idea. And that
Oh,
fish
that was
must in
funny.
turn be distinguished from things that are not animals, like plants, in some way. So it might be that the soul contributes in distinct ways to these different species of life, or these different levels of life in different ways. And that we're going to get an account of those. But at the moment, all we have is that we're looking for the qualities of the soul itself by itself, and we're also looking for it as it contributes to what it's instanced in.
And that the unsaid thing, or the first thing said there, is that we are looking for, like the text started with knowledge. Knowledge is precise and wondrous. So yeah, I think we're mapping the terrain nicely.
Oh, on that note, sorry, before we begin, moving along, separate or in something else, I'm just taking down this note. I'm thinking about the way that Aristotle is thinking about substances, or things like that. So substance is sometimes talked about as that which is separate, or that which can be separated. And its accidents are that which belong in the substance. So that which is not separate, or that which is dependent. So the table, for example,
yeah,
the table has certain qualities: brownness, squareness, I don't know, it's a certain height or whatever. And yeah, and the hardness and the brownness and the squareness are in the table, but the table itself is separable from these the brownness, the hardness, and the whateverness. So this is separate versus in something else. So it looks like the soul, we can consider it as a separate substance, or in something else. Those are the two ways that it looks like we're contemplating it in. Either the soul by itself by itself, or as in living things.
And it in living things was the language that we see it by its attributes that are developed in those living things, or that was the language, yeah?
That's how I put it out there. Whether it's correct is, yeah.
It's more or less the same thing. It's more or less the same
yeah,
thing
yeah.
But I
There's a lot of
this distinction in understanding both its nature and its distinct being.
Its nature and its
distinct being. I also found that strange.
I'm not quite sure how those things are different from the other.
That's within understanding.
Like how
so knowing its nature.
Yeah.
I'm just asking how you started. Yeah.
And we are seeking to bring the sight.
Yeah.
So, and we are seeking to bring to sight and to understanding the nature and thinghood of the soul is mine. So the nature and the being is your translation. But yeah, it does seem weird to make a distinction between the nature and the being, or the nature and the thinghood. Dan's comment made it sound like the nature would be in the understanding. Like we would know some sort of nature, the qualities that this life form has to have to be the sort of thing that it would be. But that doesn't sound right for ancient philosophy, because for it to be the kind of thing that it has to be, it would have to have a certain nature, right? I don't know, the horse doesn't have the nature of a fish or something like that. It is a horse by virtue of being a horse, or functioning as a horse.
Or maybe he's using it as he's not using it as separately, as understanding two separate things, but understanding two things through understanding one thing. If that makes sense. Maybe by understanding its nature, we understand its distinct being, instead of having to understand both those things separate. Am I making sense? Because I really can't see, like, I don't comprehend the difference between understanding something's nature and understanding something's distinct being.
Yeah, so that might be the case. Maybe we understand the being through understanding the nature, or vice versa. But I don't think it's important to decide at the moment. We can see how the text develops. Again, we're still in the first paragraph. Maybe the distinction's important, maybe not. I don't know. I always struggle reading Aristotle.
Hmm.
I think Sipho, you have the
Right.
most experience amongst all of us.
I think that's why I'm the most confused.
Okay.
I'm thinking in my head, I probably set the students straight last time because I don't remember how I understood this last time. I don't remember how I understood this at all last time. But
Trying
anyway,
to corrupt the youth.
No, I think
okay.
we're gathering, yeah, we're
Right.
gathering nice material.
Pebbles, little pebbles.
Okay, do you wanna read on for us, Ed? I think you're more.
Yeah, sure. Okay. But altogether, in every way, the soul is one of the most difficult things to get any assurance about. Okay. For
Oh, great. Okay, let's
since what
finish.
is being sought
Sorry.
is common to many other studies, I mean an account of the thinghood of something and of what it is, someone might perhaps think that there is some one method that applies to everything we want to discover the thinghood of, just as logical demonstration is the method of discovering the attributes peculiar to each thing as consequences of its thinghood. Shall I go on? Or is that more than
This
enough to?
fascinating.
No, I would like to
This is
rehear
actually
that.
fascinating.
Yeah.
This part is really fascinating for my interest in the posterior analytics.
Yeah, okay, so I'll
Say
reread
more?
it. Okay,
Yeah.
Thomas.
No,
Oh no
well, yeah,
no
no. I think like say more and then we can reread it. At least that's
Yeah.
my suggestion.
my side
Yeah.
or from Hadley.
Your side, your
Mhm.
side.
Yeah, you're so
No the
Thomas.
posterior. Yeah, the posterior analytics is like a response to the Meno it's Aristotle's account of knowledge, scientific knowledge, and it comes after his prior analytics, which I haven't read. But it basically gives an account of argument, what arguments are and how they work and how scientific knowledge works. And this seems to be an example of a question that I've been having is like, well, if knowledge comes from demonstration, how do we like knowledge is from a principle which is an essence or a definition. How do we arrive at definitions? How do we derive our definitions? In an inverted way, you can think of it like Aquinas says it in the Summa Theologica. Once the existence of something is established, we inquire into its nature. Well, couldn't you swap those two questions around in a way? How do you get the nature of something without thinking about its existence? And how do you think about the existence of something without thinking about its nature? So these two questions are constantly, I think, are perennially connected to each other. And this seems to be an interesting example of an example of an approach to a solution, or at least an attempted solution. Sorry, that's my 2 cents.
That's a massive question, Thomas. It's a massive question because there's different approaches to it, right? So you're talking about essence and existence and the relationship between being and knowing, or nature and existing. And there have been many different accounts of that, right? Um, whether or not the existence is determined by the nature depends on how we view the relation of ontology to epistemology. There might be like a correct way to look at it, but there's perennially different answers to that question, right? Um, some people like to say the existentialists say something like existence precedes essence or
Yeah,
something
my
like
mother
that.
wrote that.
Yeah, Kant has something like quantity precedes quality. So there must be something that is to have a quality applied to it. And even that is tricky because it's unclear whether the quantity is a mathematical quantity which we create and then apply qualities to, or whether it's the existence of something real and independent from ourselves. So it's big questions. I think Aristotle also is aware maybe of that question, right?
No,
And
he's def-
maybe is going to answer it in a particular way. Like whether
but this
there
is
is
like
a unity between being and knowing might be something that he's addressing.
yeah, well, I'm interested in this. This is also a very difficult. I think this is a very difficult question. Is how do you derive our definitions? And I think this is an example of his approach. And I think that that's a. Sorry, I maybe went a bit wide.
No, it's
No, I think it's good that you
it's
went wide.
how did Aristotle just express it now? It's like the way that we can know one thing might not be the way that we know all things. And then he might have mentioned logic. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly. So is there like a way by which all things are known, and then now we apply this idea of like epistemology? Or is the way of knowing each thing somehow tied up or a part of that thing, and so the coming to know of one thing is the coming to know of one thing? And how do you say nothing?
Yeah.
Shall we read more?
What I found interesting about it is even before we got to that point, like the abrupt change from this is one of the most precise, or this is the most precise, to like reaching a conclusion.
Difficult.
On this is one of the most difficult. Well, like it's, I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe I'm mistaking preciseness for simplicity. Maybe that's what's happening here. I'm making a mistake of thinking something being precise is something else being simple. It just strikes me as odd that a paragraph ago we were calling something the most precise, if not one of the most precise, and now we're calling it basically one of the most difficult things to get to, because we're not even sure about how to get to it.
Did he start by saying the knowledge of the soul is going to be the most wondrous and the most precise? Did we just kind of, is that how we?
So he's saying,
in 428, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Something of that sort.
That's pretty exciting. But that, okay.
Yeah, so he says, since we consider, this is the opening paragraph again, since we consider knowledge to be something beautiful and honored, and one sort more than another, either on account of its precision or because it is about better and more wondrous things, on both these accounts, we should with good reason rank the inquiry about the soul among the primary studies. So it's better on both its precision and its wondrousness. And now at 402.810, he says, but altogether and everywhere, the soul is one of the most difficult things to get any assurance about.
Yes. Yeah, okay, right. So like from the beginning there, like we esteem or we like knowing things that are either like very precise. So maybe mathematical one is one and plus and whatever. And then things that are wondrous to know, like I'm not too sure, maybe like the art of poetry or comedy. I don't know.
Stock market.
How to hack a stock market.
Yeah.
I think
yeah.
I think the wondrousness is usually applied when he's talking about metaphysics or like the higher studies. I wanna throw an extra complication into that I think Sipho and Thomas have pointed to, but we haven't completely spelt it out, right? So Sipho said that he was saying that because the soul is the most precise and the most wondrous knowledge, it seemed like it should be easy because things that are precise seem like they might be easy. And then we think about mathematics. Mathematics is precise and it gives us a really good account of things, but it's maybe not easy, right? There's some complicated mathematics, right, out there in the world, and it's difficult to do, but it is incredibly precise. So maybe that's one way in which we can understand the difficulty as following from the precision rather than in conflict with it. Now here's the here's the conflict, right? He says that he raises the question of whether there's one way to understand everything through logical demonstration, or each thing needs to be understood in terms of its own nature. Now, we might want to say, well, mathematics is exactly the type of field that understands everything through logical demonstration, right? In mathematics, there's deductions. We have sort of like Euclid's geometry has sort of first principles, and we apply these first principles to the construction of figures, and what follows in the figures is derived from the specific postulates of things like lines and points and how they fit together. So it seems like mathematics, which is incredibly precise, or which we're taking to be our paradigm of precision, is precisely the type of science that does understand everything in terms of logical demonstration, or in terms of some overarching formula to which it can expand out of itself. Whereas if we think about understanding each thing in terms of itself, in terms of its own nature, that seems quite distinct from logical demonstration, right? It seems like what the thing is would have to be contained within itself. And that seems much more like the function or the form of a living creature or something like that. Then again, just so that we have all the complications out of the table, if there's no one way to understand all things, and each thing must be understood in terms in and of itself, then how do we understand each thing as related to one another? It seems like we get knowledge of the individual, but we never get knowledge of its relationships. So maybe, I don't know, I know the function of a squirrel is to go and eat certain food or something like that. But I can't know what the squirrel is like in its ecosystem, or I can't even have a concept of ecosystem, because ecosystem requires squirrels in relation to certain trees and botany, and in relation to other animals and entities. I saw a hawk carrying a squirrel off the other day to eat it. It was very sad. But on if we have to understand, yeah, it was very exciting for the hawk, I could imagine. If we want to understand the individual by itself or in and of itself, how do we ever account for the relationship between the hawk and the squirrel or something like that? If we are going to understand the soul in terms of itself, it seems like we get the individual but no relation. And then here's the final complication.
Metaphysics.
If we understand each thing in and of itself or by itself, isn't there one way to understand each thing?
Sure, you
Yeah.
answered that cloud
Yeah.
deadly.
I'm 100% sure. I'm just confused, people.
These
That's
questions sound very familiar. They sound familiar right now. You sure? Yeah,
I think it must
I
just
know,
be like I must just be like absorbing them from Larry and Larry's teachers. These seem like the questions of lineage that like have just like soaked
Yeah.
into my skin from being around contact with these people.
that
So
I think those last two, just to maybe it's just sticking out, like it came out in that paragraph that had to do with the soul, and then we were kind of stumbling around the language that was almost like prepositional. Like, do we talk about the soul being in things and then it gives them certain attributes, or does the thing like have a soul? Is it a soul? Like, how does a soul, because the soul seems like this distinct thing, but then it's related to or in things, or, and then I think the language we used was, we know the soul by its attributes in a thing. So then maybe it's not in that thing per se, or at least there's that tension. So without, not to be premature, would that resolve this sense of at least a part of the tension? in that we say that the soul is something distinct, known in a singular way.
We could do that, but then I think the issue is we're gonna have to start asking in what way is it distinct? Is it distinct like physically, or is it just distinct theoretically? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm speculating, and maybe it's not right that I do it because I'm trying to resolve a tension or tensions. Maybe we should be heightening them. So if I just wipe away the work done, I apologize.
I have a feeling no matter how much we try to resolve these tensions,
I'm so
we'll
lost.
just
I
keep
don't even know.
heightening.
Say again, Thomas.
I'm lost. I don't know what questions we have anymore.
Okay, well, let me.
Many, yeah.
We got quite a few. If
We're working up
the
your appetite.
so maths, okay? Like and this is a big temptation or seduction. It's so powerful as a language, and I'm obviously going to be speaking from a modern infused context. Like we can use language to explain lots of phenomena, maybe all. Okay, that's the sense. But we have to in some way convert those phenomena into quantifications of some sort. Then we can also so we're describing or we're mapping different phenomena through the use of math. So that would give us the sense that we can know all things through one like method. Like we have like we can use the mathematical process or whatever. The maybe even we say, oh no, what drives mathematics is something like reason or logic. So now it's not really, it doesn't really matter whether like what the quanta is. It's more about how the pieces that are related come to relate, and then the consequences of the manner of their relation. But there's some process there, logic, by which we come to know all things. So this seems like anything that can be known comes to be known through the same way. But that was only one of our options. The other option, which I'm not sure, is that each thing that is to be known in its own unique way. I don't know if I'm expressing that like nicely or, and it seems like on that side we might be talking soul. So then the thing, yeah.
Okay. I was going to say if we could know, if everything had to be known in its own unique way, right? How would we know it arrived at the right method for knowing something?
That's the thing, isn't it? Because now we get to the question whether, since method is one thing, do we know method in one way and apply it the same to everything else, or do we have to now understand the methods of things differently? Did you get what I'm saying? Because a method is a method, and to be a method is to be one thing. But to be a method for something means you're going to be a method for many different things. So do we come to understanding of method because it is one thing?
But this is where I'm sorry, Sipho. This is where I'm seduced or tempted by this like distinction that's come out in terms of the soul. It's like if the soul is a distinct thing, so I'm just like speculating a way to resolve this tension. Then we can say the soul is the thing that is known in its unique way in each instance. But in terms of knowing other things, we can only know the soul by means of its given attributes, the attributes that it gives those things. And then we use different methods to understand the different things that are, but the thing that is known uniquely is the soul.
Are we postulating certain hypothetical situations as to the nature of the soul to see which method or which approach would be more appropriate.
So I've quickly just like read on a little bit just to see where this is heading. We're about to get to the series of impulses, so it looks like we're on the right track.
I think we should push on ahead, just so we
Yeah.
cover some significant ground. Should push on ahead at least, and then discuss it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's,
I'm sorry to
let's
interrupt
just-
you there, Sipho. I don't know
No,
why I
don't
was
worry.
chomping at the bit to resolve tension.
Well, I mean,
Whoever wants to read.
you've just before we go on, you've intensified tension, right? Now we need to understand. So now before we had two options. Before we had the mathematical blanket statement option, which is we just blanket statement everything and we understand the individual in terms of the mathematical formula to which we apply things, which is precise. Or we understand the individual uniquely as an individual in and of itself, and then we have a problem of relation. So those were the two options that I brought up. You brought in a third option where we can somehow understand the individual uniquely and in relation to others, right? The soul as a soul by itself and in relation to other living organisms. So,
Yeah.
if anything, there's now three options on the table, none of which sound particularly attractive.
Three is a great number. I'm happy with three. So that's other. So yeah.
I think
let's read.
I wanna read straight through until where he says that we're at the impulses. So that's just above 402b. So I'm just gonna reread from where we started there, and then we'll end at the end of this paragraph because there's a lot of run-on sentences, and I think each is probably important. So I'm gonna read and just try and keep track of what's going on because there's a lot. But altogether, in every way, the soul is one of the most difficult things to get any assurance about. For, since what is being sought is common to many other studies, I mean an account of the thinghood of something and of what it is, someone might perhaps think that there is some one method that applies to everything that we want to discover the thinghood of, just as logical demonstration is the method of discovering the attributes peculiar to each thing as consequences of its thinghood. In that case, what would have to be sought would be this method. But if there is not some one common method of pursuing what something is, the work we have taken in hand becomes still more difficult, since it will require that we get hold of some way of approaching each particular thing. And even if it were evident whether this were demonstration or division of general classes or some other method, there would still be many impulses and false starts over the things from which one ought to begin the search for different studies having different starting point, just as do the studies of number and of plane figure. So that's the whole paragraph. So the complications that we brought out seem to be the right complications. Altogether, in every way, the soul is most difficult. Well, since what is being sought is common to many other studies. So there's some other studies that study thinghood and of what it is. I'm thinking maybe metaphysics and logic. Someone might perhaps think that there is some one method that applies to everything. So some people might assume that there's some method that can apply as a sort of blanket statement over everything, like the mathematical method or something like that. In that case, what would have to be sought would be the method, right? We would have to figure out what is the blanket method that we could apply to each and everything just in virtue of the method itself. But if there is not some one common method of pursuing what something is, the work becomes even more difficult because it requires that we know each thing as particular, each individual thing by itself. So that was the second option. And even if it were evident whether this demonstration or division of some other method, there would still be many impulses and false starts over the things from which one ought to begin to search. For different studies have different starting points, just as do the studies of numbers and of plane figures. So that mathematical hint there is interesting and also disturbing, and maybe points to Dan's solution a little bit in some way. Mathematics has a method, right? There's some way of like deducing or carrying through a demonstration in mathematics. We start from some set of postulates or axioms, and then we derive what follows from these axioms. But
Is there
just
doing math?
yeah, sorry.
Is there a way of doing mathematics? Just
I'm thinking that the paradigm here must have been Euclid.
okay. So you're thinking paradigmatically. Okay, I'm just making sure that I think there are a lot of methods.
There are other methods in mathematics, yeah. But he says, for just as different studies have different starting points, just as do the studies of numbers and of plane figures. So we might want to say that mathematics is the general study, but number and plane figures are different species of mathematical studies. And number and plane figures, geometry and unit, are going to have different starting points or different axioms or different principles which make them numbers or units. Numbers or figures, right? I'm not really sure how units work or numbers work in Greece, but plane figures is the sort of thing that Euclidean geometry will talk about. And there'll be starting points for that. So even though we might group these two underneath the same heading by shorthand, it does seem like we're getting a way to understand the individual as an individual somehow related to a larger whole or something like
that. In a sense, it brings us straight back to the beginning again. Because now it seems that we need to know the nature of plane figures to know where to place plane figures. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, we need to already know its nature in order for us to know in which family it belongs, right? Obviously, there's what's the word he likes? Genus, something like that. Mm-hmm. Specific groups above, and then a group in the group, and a group in the group, and a group in the group, right? Like you said, we can have mathematics, and then in mathematics we're gonna fall into arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and all of that. And each one has its method, even though we all are mathematics, right? So there might be the similar thing that ties the fact that the mathematics together. It might show they'll be different from you say something like mathematics, literature, and then in literature you find yourself with something like, I don't know, poetry here, right? There might be, I don't know what else, poetry and something else, but
prose
might be something. Yeah, there might be something that's common to the things that, I mean, they obviously as if they belong in the same family. There's something that's common to these things, but there's something that's specific about the thing. And again, it seems to heighten the problem we were having earlier. Do we now inquire by means of what's common to all these things, or do we inquire by means of what's particular to the thing? Or is it both? Somehow we need to find a way to do both.
Yeah, so especially in the question of soul, right? Soul seems to be particularly difficult because soul, you might want to say soul, and then there might be different types of souls. I mean, I'm anticipating some of the accounts here, but if there's a difference between plant souls and animal souls and rational souls or something like that, then each of them are going to have something that makes them distinct from one another. But in virtue of having something that makes them distinct from one another, they all share a commonality in terms of having something soul as such or something like that. So it seems like we have this issue between the genus and the species and their relationship to one another. What's going on?
Maybe the best method is both. The best method is start there, start here, see if they meet in the middle well. If they don't, we don't know what to do. You know what I'm saying? Might be.
I think we should read on a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
While we have some time, because the next sentence seems to be responding to the impulse that he raised. So I'll just read on. But first, perhaps, it is necessary to decide in which general class it is and what it is. I mean, whether it is an independent thing and a this, or a quality or quantity, or some other one of the distinct ways of attributing being to anything. And further, whether it belongs among things having being in potency, or is rather some sort of being at work staying itself. For this makes no small difference. Okay, I'm just going to continue reading because he's just throwing up options to get us more confused, I guess.
Right.
And one must also examine whether it is divisible or without parts, and whether all soul is of the same kind, or if it is not of the same kind, whether souls differ as forms of one general class or in their general classes. For those who now speak and inquire about the soul seem to consider only the human soul. But one must be on the lookout so that it does not escape noticing whether there is one articulation of soul, just as of living thing, or a different one for each, as for horse, dog, human being, and God. While a living thing in general is either nothing at all or a later concern, as would similarly be in question if any other common name were applied.
Just a wild card. I would appreciate if we can keep ragging on fish for whatever reason. And I guess remembering that the knowledge of the soul is possible. There's something intriguing, there's something striking or intriguing about that beginning. He says it's really difficult, but it's possible. So like, I don't mean to detract, but those two things, just to add them.
Just a side note: the Greek word for soul is psyche. I just remembered that now, which is the root of our word for psychology. Just
I don't think that's a.
Does that account
I think
for
that's
all, or does it count for one of them?
It's I think as far as I know, this is the word that he's using.
I think Anima is the one.
Anima is
I'm
Latin.
confused.
Anima is
Okay.
Latin.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think what Sipho's trying to point at is when he talks about whether we talk about only a human soul, that might be the subject of psychology, right? Which we ordinarily, especially in contemporary times, would equate with soul as such. But if he is using the word suke, he might be using it in a broader scope than just psychological soul or the human soul.
Psychology has, as a subject, colonized, dare I use that word, or imperialized, or in fact, it's segregated off too much of what that word originally, that root word originally meant, containing it principally within human psychology. Although it's like study animals sometimes, like Jane Goodall, I think, sort of, was she just an animal behaviorist? The lady who studied
you can see the difference in the, can I say this? You can see the difference just based on the fact that you in the example you're giving, you're applying it to humans and then you're applying it to animals. But here we seem to be applying it to all living things, such as plants as well. And I don't know much about modern psychology, but I don't think they study plants. I don't think they even think plants have a psyche. Yeah, I'm saying.
Yeah.
So from there already you can tell that, look, what we're talking about isn't the same thing. Because it seems here what we're talking about is something a plant has. And in modern days, when you mention the term psyche, it doesn't apply to plants. So already you can see.
This is
highlights how far we've moved.
It might be for the best. It might be for the best. Again, it might have been. It might be these, like I said, distinctions. I mean, look at in the Republic, the study of the soul in the Republic, or when Plato goes into the tripart soul, it is far closer to our modern day understanding of psychology than the soul here. That makes sense. There he seems to be talking about what we call the psyche today. But then if we jump to the same author Plato, when we go to the Phaedo, the distinctions are far too different for us to think that the word, the to think that we can just apply, that the word can just apply with the same meaning as we understand it today. I'm making sense.
Yeah, and I imagine Timaeus would throw another spanner in the works there, because there the world is presented as a sort of living animal, right? And insofar as that's not something that we ordinarily consider living. The psychologists aren't doing physics or metaphysics when they're thinking about our soul or our mind or whatever you want to call it. So
You're not even doing.
I wanna raise a couple things, and then I also want to suggest that this might be a good spot to like come to rest at.
Yeah, I agree.
Because the difficulties are worthwhile to be stuck at. So what Dan said, just returning to what Dan said earlier about how knowledge of the soul must be possible, but it is this difficult, precise thing that we're trying to do. So just in terms of the precision, we can now see the ways in which the precision is difficult. I think what you can think about him doing in this paragraph from just above 402b to 402b10, if you have the Stephanus pagination with you, or whatever the pagination is for Aristotle.
In Aristotle, it's Becker.
Oh, the Becker pages, thank you. Yeah, so he says, but first perhaps it is necessary to decide in which general class the soul is and what the soul is. I mean, whether the soul is a substance and a this, or a quality, an accident, or some other one of the distinct ways of saying being about something, and further, whether it belongs about things that have being in potency, or rather at some sort of being at work, staying itself, actuality. Well, this makes no small difference. So either it's a substance or an accident or a potency or an actuality. So these are the sorts of distinct classes that we might think about it fitting in. Either it has being in virtue of itself, it's an independent thing, a this or a substance. An attribute, it doesn't exist by itself, it's just part of the living organism. And it belongs in the living organism like brownness belongs in the table. Or it has being in some other way. So its existence is not intrinsic or not dependent on something else, not independent or dependent on something else. So being in potency is potentially being, it's not actualized in some manner. And I was thinking about, we were reading the Metaphysics with Helper recently, and one of the things that has being in potentia is mathematical objects. They don't exist in a substance, or as a substance. They can't be either or, and there's a long argument that Aristotle gives for that. But he says that they exist materially or potentially in a substance. So the table has squareness or something like that, but the squareness in the table is not perfect squareness. And so it's potentially in the table because we have to actualize it in our intellect by thinking the squareness. And so we sort of abstract out. The term abstract is difficult to understand here, but for the sake of just clarity, we abstract it out, and the potential that's in the table, the squareness in the table, comes to be actualized in the mind. So being potentially, and then being at work, staying itself is difficult. It comes up in the Metaphysics, but the only example that I know is God. Self-thinking thought as intellect. It's an activity that's self-sustaining. He also sometimes says that the eye has a sort of actuality because sight is always seeing when it's seeing or something like that. Like we never not seeing.
I was the what? I was not I with an I.
Yeah, EYE. It's yeah, so it's bizarre. So those are the four options that we've got: substance, accident, potency, actuality. And whether it is divisible, indivisible, all soul is of the same kind, not of the same kind, where the soul is different as form of one general class or in their general classes. So does the soul have parts or is it indivisible? And you can think about this in terms of psychology, actually, and maybe in terms of modern philosophy. Is there, so let's use soul as human soul for now, or mind. Are there faculties of the soul, parts of the soul, reason, understanding,
Will
intuition, imagination, will?
in,
Or does the soul not have parts? Is it indivisible and one thing, right? Is the first part
One
of
thing
that
that
section?
changes.
Yeah, that even sounds strange to say, but I know what you mean. And whether all soul is of the same kind, is there one kind of soul, or are there many kinds of soul? Is there maybe soul as such, or is there animal, plant, human, I don't know, material, whatever you want to call it?
Immaterial.
Or if it is not of the same kind, whether souls differ as forms of one general class or in their general classes. So whether they differ as distinct kinds of soul, like human soul is one class, and then we have the different types of souls, like in the Republic, the bronze soul, silver soul, and gold soul. And then we have animal souls, and there's distinct kind of animal souls, maybe, I don't know. Or whether there's soul as such, and human soul, animal soul, plant soul are all subspecies of the category soul. Um, so those are pretty much all our options on the table. And the issue is that people used to speak about just the human soul, but we should be on the lookout because there might be human souls, godlike souls, animal souls, plant souls. We need to figure out how many
For all we
souls there
know,
are. Yeah,
for all we know,
so
there might be
how could
a
how
distinction
could
in.
of soul
sorry, Thomas.
can
Yeah,
something that is of its essence to be have a soul?
Depends on
what do
what
you
you
mean?
think soul does, right?
Yeah, I mean it could be a soul, but how to possess? I mean, what's the distinction to be a soul and to possess a soul? Does your soul possess a soul? Then you get the homunculus problem of like souls within souls within souls within souls.
Yeah, is the soul a substance? Is it being a soul, or is it an accident? Do we have a soul?
What characteristics?
Ah, thank you for that Aristotelian distinction to me.
Yeah, right. So we could be a soul, the soul is, and we are that, or we could have a soul if the soul is an accident. And God, I thought your question was something different, like God always is, so why should God have a soul? It seems like souls, one of the assumptions that we might bring to the table is that souls only belong to living things, and all living things are mortal, right? Um, that might be one
Or
of the things that we bring to the table, but it might be a question, an open question, whether there are some living things that are non-mortal, whatever that
the
might mean.
term living God repeatedly.
Yeah, maybe God just lives eternally, right?
Is
I don't know. I'm not religious or anything like that, but that might be the type of idea going on here.
Sounds like you're skipping ahead, kid. Sounds like you're skipping ahead.
tipping ahead, but you know
I
me, I
think
always like to.
People,
There
Guys,
was a point, there was another point I find interesting, that in making the distinctions between plants, animals, and human beings, right? There is also the possibility that there seems to be a point which obviously there's this cap off point that it does spoiler, it does go into like this distinction of what's the base requirement and at what point have you exceeded this group. Like now you're no longer an animal. I mean now you're no longer a plant, you're an animal. That's like the base requirement. Now you're no longer this, you're this. But what I find interesting is entertaining the possibility of well, if humans have distinct souls from animals and animals have distinct souls from plants. Is it possible that within the groups there's distinctions of souls as well? You know what I'm saying? Like, well,
The
there's
infant
different
soul.
animals. Like, different animals, surely. There's different souls for different animals, because a lion is very different from the fish.
Mhm.
Like, it's hella different. Like,
Very
it's got
different.
similar
Yeah.
problems, yes. It's got similar problems, yes, but the problems are so far apart that we would never mistake one for the other. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Would never,
There's
in the same way that would never mistake a human for an animal.
there's a similar but adjacent problem as well. Not only are there different souls within the animal species or different souls within subspecies, uh, are there different stages of soul, right? Is the
Within the
infant
same
soul
species.
different from the adult soul within the same species, right? The child seems much more animal-like than the adult does. I mean, sorry, children listening to this podcast,
In most
but
cases. In most cases. in
yeah,
most, it
well, they
depends
seem
on
to
the
be
child.
yeah, they seem to be doing something different than the animal. And I mean, maybe even something closer to the plant at the beginning of their lives, the human child, right? That's what, like, they need so much care. They barely, like, they don't move around. There's no locomotion going on. That's not, like, part of that. They just, like, take in nutrients and then, like, occasionally scream here and there. Which, you know, I don't know. I mean, plants don't scream here and there, but they do just take in nutrients. Like that's like what they do, and grow.
We can go before the infant. Go before the infant. When they're just developing within the womb. They're not screaming. They're literally doing the things the plant.
Hmm.
So
So
it
then,
seems there is a progression in soul as well.
yeah. So is the distinction one that has distinct levels, or is it a continuum, or how are we cutting
Uh,
this? How are we cutting this up?
that's the thing.
Right.
One thing I'm sure of that's definitely not on our table is fish. It's not a candidate. It's not part of the consideration.
Why is it
It's
not a
just,
candidate?
I mean, it's obvious. Think about it. These, these fish,
Something
these fish,
something's fishy's going on.
it's just, yeah. They might ruin our Soulful Sundays.
Soulful Sundays. Oh,
I think we can cap
They
in at this.
beat their
I think
Soulful.
we've in a sense we've established a target. We've also we know what we're trying to kill now. We see the animal we're trying to hunt. We need to figure out our tools, how we're gonna kill it. Now we need to figure out how we're gonna kill it. So yeah, I think this is a good place to stop the inquiry for today. And then